subject, filters, and contracts. The big moment is now. Let's learn contracts and how ACI does its policy-driven architecture. You build the fabric, but you have to specify what needs to talk to what or what is allowed to talk to what. So that is where the contract comes into place. The contract is a set of rules or set of policies that allows communication between endpoint groups in either the same tenant or multiple tenants. Okay? So you can apply a contract to its own tenant. So you allow communication between two endpoint groups that are residing on the same tenant, or you attach the contract to different tenants, and this is done with a contract interface. So we're going to take a look at contract interface in another section when we cover a multi-tenant policy approach. So let's start by discussing the attributes inside a contract. We got two main targets. We got a provider and a consumer. So what's that for? So provider, I am providing a service to a consumer, meaning that I am providing a particular access to something that a consumer needs. In this case, my application servers are my consumers. My database servers are providing my database services to the application servers. And that's how you designate in which direction you attach the contract. Provider, meaning that I'm providing the service to the consumer, and then consumer is basically that. It's consuming, it's utilizing those access resources specified on the contract. In every contract, you're going to create a subject. The subject is going to basically have, and let's imagine this as just a normal contract, right? You have a contract when you subscribe to a service or like cell phone or cable, internet, you have a contract, and then inside the contract, you have a subject. So the subject of the contract usually is 12 months, right? So you get assigned yourself 12 months on the contract. And let's say this is a contract for an internet service. Your subject is going to be a 12-month with 100 meg a second bandwidth. That will be your attached subject. So this is the attribute that I am going to specify in the contract that I'm going to give you. So we mutually agree in the contract. What is this? The filters or the attribute, right? So I just gave you a, real world common contract, which means that I'm going to give you 100 megs a second in a period of 12 months in this contract, and you will be consuming this service, okay? Filters, it's what we specify that we're going to give resource access to my customers. For this particular contract that we're going to create, we're going to allow ICMP or ping, and we are going to allow SQL service because we are serving databases for our application servers. So my endpoint group application servers, it's going to obtain the database information from my DB SRVS EPG. So my app SRVS EPG will obtain database services from DB SRVS. So let's go ahead and configure this simple contract, and you're going to understand a little bit more what I'm talking about. There is two ways of building the contract. It's either both ways, meaning that I can select the contract to be applied both ways, either inbound or outbound. So in which direction, it doesn't matter which direction, I am going to allow this communication to happen, right? There's cases where, yeah, you might need to. There's cases where you might not. You just need to have an acknowledgement from the customer so then the customer can communicate, but the customer cannot offer the service back, right? So I am not going to allow the customer to offer SQL because there's no SQL here. SQL is on the database EPG, okay? So let's go ahead and configure a quick contract. Let's attach the contract to our existing endpoint groups, and let's do some testing and see how it goes. Okay, so now let's take a look at contracts. Remember, we are on our tenant web server farm. And by the way, there's two ways to do this. Let's say if you're going to have a very common contract or subject in multiple tenants, you either have two ways of doing this. If you want to reuse the same object or the same contract, the same subject or filters, across all your tenants, you can generate or create this particular object from the common tenant. And this common tenant is by default on the ACI Apex. So anything that I create here can be shared across any other tenant. Okay, understood? Or I can create objects specifically for this particular tenant, which cannot be shared with other tenants. Okay, so if I want to make something in the common tenant, I can then utilize that same object on other tenants. So let me go ahead into the web server farm. Let's real quick expand contracts, right? So I am in tenant web SRV farm, expand contracts, standard contracts. We're going to do a standard contract. And then we're going to select, first of all, the filters. In our slide, we have two filters. We have ICMP and SQL. So let's create those two filters. So then we can create the subject, which is allow-db services. Okay, so let's go ahead and do all this. Okay, let me make the first filter. First filter name will be called ICMP, right? And gonna add an entry to this filter, which it will specify the actual service, right? And we can call this ICMP. Ethernet type is IP, of course. Protocol is ICMP, okay? And we click update. That's it, because it's ICMP, there's no actual port, it's a protocol, so we're just going to allow that. We'll press submit. Now we have our first filter created. Let's create that SQL filter, SQL, and we're going to select type or Ethernet type, IP, protocol, this time it's TCP, because it's a SQL TCP port. So we're going to select TCP, source port or source range. And this is just like a firewall. We say, well, from this port to this port, we're allowing to this port to this port. I am not specifying the source because, again, it's random ports from my host trying to communicate to my SQL side, so I don't want to specify a particular port range. But if you have a reason in your environment to do so, you can do it from here. In this case, I just need to specify the destination port that I'm allowing. And in this case, I just need to specify the SQL port. Okay, so let's go ahead. You have either some predefined ones, or you just can go ahead and write up the actual port number if you don't see it on the default ones. 1433 is your SQL port. 1433 is your SQL port. And then you can say you have specified section rules and your TCP rule. So in this case, I can say as long as it's established, then you want to allow this. If you receive the acknowledgement, then allow it. Or unspecified. In this case, most of the time you just leave it unspecified, or you can just leave this in blank. We'll click update and done. We have the filter for SQL, which allows the TCP protocol over 1433. Press submit. Now we have those two filters. Let's go ahead and create that contract subject. Let's create the contract. This is the contract, and let's call this DB service. You know what? I think it's DB access. Let's write it up. DB access scope. The scope is in which location are you intending to attach this contract, or what is allowed from a Fabric standpoint to use this contract or to enforce this contract. I can say, well, only meant for the application profile, so it's only going to be used for that particular application profile on the tenant. It's going to be specified for a VRF, meaning that anything that is attached to a particular VRF is going to be applied to. Let's say you have two different VRFs on the same tenant, then you apply this to the application profile, because then it's only allowing you to target a particular VRF. Or also you can attach this contract to communicate to an external network or layer 3 out, and then allow the traffic to as well. And we're going to see that as well on another video. Every single option that you have on the tenant, then you can assign this to be a tenant contract. Or global, which means that I can use it across my whole fabric if I want to. That doesn't mean that I'm going to have the object available across the fabric. I will need to export this contract in order for me to have it, or I have to create a common tenant contract. And then the common tenant contract can be used anywhere. Okay? Subjects. And in subjects, we are going to label this as allowed DB services. So we got the name, and we can say, well, apply both directions and then reverse the filter ports, meaning that backwards is just source, destination to my source port, etc. So I'm just reversing the direction of the TCP communication from the consumer to the provider or vice versa. Usually I just leave this in default, but if you want to tighten, be more control from your consumer to provider communication, then you specify what's allowed from the consumer side. By unclicking this, you're going to see two options that can actually provide me what is allowed from the consumer to the provider and what is allowed from the provider to the consumer from a filter standpoint, right? So you can say from the consumer, I am only acknowledging, meaning that I don't want to allow any ports but the acknowledgement back to the provider. In the provider, obviously, you want to add the two filters that we created. So in this demonstration, when we're going to make it simple, I just want to add those two objects, filters. Let's add the SQL. Let's add the ICMP, update, and press OK. And finally, we press submit. And voila, we got our first contract. Let's use this. So first of all, I am going to try to ping. I'm going to run a constant ping from my application server to my database server to see if I get access to. So I am pinging my default gateway. Let me see if I can ping my application server, 150.110, and I cannot. But let's make it fun. Let me go ahead and cancel real quick, but then I am going to run a constant. So once we apply the contract, you should see this working out, okay? So let me go ahead and open my server 1. And we got server 1, and let's do the same thing. In this case, I'm going to try to ping the database server, which I should not be able, okay? Now let me go to the APIC and attach the contract to the provider. In this case, the database server CPG, and then the consumer, the application server CPG. Let's go back here, application profiles, web app 1, application servers. You expand this, and then you can see contract here. Right click, and my application server will be consuming my database server. It's going to access those resources from the database. So it will be a consume contract to the application server. And then select the contract, and there you go. DB access. Submit. Now I have the consume contract attached to the application servers because they're consuming the service. Now let's go ahead and attach to the database servers the same way, but in this case, it's going to be a provider contract because I'm providing database access. Add a provider contract, DB access, and submit. Everything worked out. Look at that. Beautiful. You see? Again, to recap, created the filters. In the filters, we specify ICMP and specify SQL. Created the subject and the contract, attached the filters to the subject, and then created the contract. Finally, attach the contract to both EPGs, one as consumer, one as provider. If you want to see and confirm that this is actually working because of the contract, let me go to the contract and remove the ICMP from the subject, and you should see this starts to fail. This will start to fail. And let me take a look at the other side. So yeah, both of them can talk each other. So let me go back to the APIC. Let me go to contracts. And in this standard contract, I am going to modify it. And by the way, you can select the object and modify it on the fly if you want to. And then I can then select here ICMP and take it out. If I take it out, I should then see ping failing. So let me go ahead and take it out. Let me go back and wait for it. Boom, there you go. So I just took out ICMP from the contract and they can no longer communicate. Let me put it back at filter, ICMP, submit, and waiting. There you go. You saw? Very straightforward. As long as you keep practicing ACI, keep doing this kind of lab, you're going to understand even more. Obviously, we are just creating a very simple contract. In this section, I just want to show you how a contract works. Obviously, there's way more to it. There's contract interfaces, there is taboo contracts, and we're going to discuss that as we go along in our training series. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you understand what contracts are all about, because they're basically enforcing traffic in and out. So you must understand this very, very deep into. You should be very knowledgeable when it comes to contracts in ACI, okay? Okay, everyone, in our next video, we're going to take a look at ACI domains to tenant relationship. Thank you for watching.